Hi, I've just finished reading Isaac Asimov's The Caves of Steel, and I would like to talk about it. We'll start with the blurb and then some spoiler-free thoughts, and then we'll lead into some spoiler thoughts talking about the story as a whole. In the vast, domed cities of Earth, artificial intelligence is strictly controlled. In the distant outer worlds, colonists and robots live side by side. A spacer ambassador is found dead, and Detective Elijah Bailey is assigned to find the killer. But with relations between the two cultures in the balance, the spacers insist he work with a partner of their choosing, a robot partner, R. Daniil Olivar. Bailey has never seen a robot like Daniil before, almost indistinguishable from a human, and soon, though the free laws of robotics should render the crime impossible, Bailey's partner becomes his prime suspect. Now here's the thing, I didn't read the blurb before reading this book. I just decided to start reading Isaac Asimov. In fact, I decided to start reading Isaac Asimov long ago, but looking up reading orders online, most of them suggested starting with the short story collection The Complete Robot, which I believe includes the famous iRobot collection. And while I really enjoyed the short stories contained within, I'm awful at finishing short story collections because, you know, there's no narrative through line hook which is drawing me back. If I'm going to finish a short story collection, it's probably going to be something like the first Witcher novel, which isn't a novel. It's a collection of short stories with a narrative framing device. And so eventually I just said, you know what? I'm just going to go start reading the novels because while I'm sure the short stories are great, and I have read the most important one, by the way, the last question, or the most revered one, and it's kind of what got me wanting to read Isaac Asimov in the first place. I realised I was never going to get to read the bulk of his work if I just made myself do it the chronological way, or the recommended way, so I'm starting with The Caves of Steel, which is the second recommended book. And at first I was honestly slightly hesitant, because I was like, what I really want to read is the Foundation series, because I've heard so many great things, and what prompted this renewed interest is I was recommended a YouTube channel called Quinn's Ideas, and it's a really good channel, but the video topics mostly focus around talking about science fiction stories, and you know, I want to read the science fiction stories for myself before I hear discussion about them because it's going to spoil some pretty major things. And so he started talking about Foundation. I went, I want to read Foundation. And then I thought, wait, I can read Foundation by itself. That's a whole thing. But if I really want the full Isaac Asimov experience, I should probably start off the Robot series. I'm telling you all this because going into this book, I didn't really know what to expect, and I didn't really expect to love it all that much. I was worried it would feel like a bit of a chore to get through before we could get to some of the more, you know, big outer space stuff. But as it turns out, The Caves of Steel is fantastic, and I had such a good time reading it. Oh my god. I don't really read mystery novels, and to be honest, I didn't know this was going to be a mystery novel, and if I did, I might not have picked it up, if I'm being honest. I have a bit of a stigma against mystery novels, and it's not because they're bad, it's just because I have only ever really seen them from the outside, and as someone who works in a store which sells books, the titles are all so similar and generically ominous, and I've just developed a bit of a distaste towards them because of this. But this isn't one of those. This is a science fiction mystery. This is a science fiction novel that happens to be a mystery novel. This isn't a mystery thriller novel written in a week that you'd pick up at an airport, so I shouldn't have, you know, put negative marks towards it for that. And I didn't, because I didn't know it was going to be a mystery novel, but you know what I mean. But the thing that's so great about this book is not only is it a really good mystery and a really good mystery novel that has you not only trying to figure it out the entire time, but having the ability to figure it out. And my experience was that I very much worked things out slightly ahead of the main character, which was a very fulfilling experience. But not only was it a mystery novel, it was a mystery novel which showed us a world of, I think it's like 5,000 years in the future. And it's a world which feels so real. Isaac Asimov's imagination is so vivid, and the way in which he delivers world building to us through this mystery novel is stellar. Because on the one hand, we're dealing with this murder of this spacer and, who could have done it and all this stuff and why would they have done it. And on the other hand, we need to learn about the context of the entire world within which the murder took place in a way which allows us to feel like we are keeping up with the protagonist in trying to figure out who did it and why. And that is not an easy task. And something I realized as I was reading this is a 200-page book, right? I listened to it via Audible, by the way. I meant to mention this. No, not Audible. Libro FM. This is my first Libro FM audiobook because I'm trying to chuck Audible in the bin because of their business practices. And by the way, real quick tangent, I had absolutely no issues with using Libro as a service. It's pretty indistinguishable from Audible in terms of the quality of the service that they provide. It's also a bit cheaper, and I was able to use the code SWITCH to get free audiobook tokens for my first month instead of one. This is not a sponsored segment, I just wanted to pass that information along. I don't know if it's still running. But this was narrated by William Hope, and he was really, really good. The voices he did for the different characters were very distinguished. I was never confused about who was talking. And the cadence in which he told the story was just solid and entertaining. It really helped me get immersed, especially like the kind of New Yorker accent that the main character has. Really helped establish the setting and the themes as well, the difference between his voice and Daniil's voice. Bailey's kind of more of a New Yorker, the grizzled detective, and then you've got Daniil who talks a lot more like Spock from Star Trek. And it's just, it's really well done. Anyway, it's like a 200-page book. The audiobook is 8 hours and 29 minutes. And as someone who has mostly been reading epic fantasy, which are these giant 1,000-page long chonkers, like 40-hour long plus audiobooks, I came to realize that maybe one of the reasons why I've been having trouble finishing books lately is just because I'm a little burned out on that style of telling you a story and building a world. Something I'm really impressed with in this book is just how much of a solid idea I got about what was happening within this world within 200 pages instead of 14 books of 1,000 each. And there's merits to both ways of doing it, but I didn't feel like the picture I had of a world was at all scant or it could have, sure, it can be expanded upon, but I've got a pretty solid impression of the world as presented by Isaac Asimov in The Caves of Steel. You've got two main factions. You've got the people who remain living on Earth and have kind of developed these mega cities that they just call cities and live within these giant domes, and they don't see the outside world or sky at all. And it's like this hyper end state of capitalism. And then you've got the spacers, who are the people who live in these 50 worlds, or I guess maybe 49 worlds, maybe Earth is the 50th, I don't know. And they've colonized these worlds, and they've kind of grown apart from Earth in the last few thousand years, I suppose. I don't know the timeline specifically, but that's the impression I get. And recently, within the last 25 years, some of the spacers decided to set up essentially a colony on Earth called Spacetown near New York. And there was a great big schism between the spacers and I guess the Earthlings, because of how long they'd been apart of their different worldviews and how they treated each other. And the people of Earth very much viewed the spacers as like these snobbish, hoity-toity, like, we're better than you because we've been living in space kind of people, and they've been living on Earth and toiling away and trying to make that work. And so there's this rift between them. And then, of course, there's the robots, and you can see the robots of Earth are of a certain type, and the robots of the spacers are perhaps a little bit more technologically advanced, but they all kind of adhere to the same, the three principles of robotics and all that stuff. And as mentioned in the blurb, one of the main characters of this novel, who we spend a lot of time with, is Daniil, who is a robot, but is also Bailey's partner. And how do people feel about robots on Earth? And there's a great big upheaval of, robots are taking our jobs and stuff. And on the one hand, I'm like, man, I can draw some pretty distinct parallels between the robots in this novel and generative AI in our current world, which is interesting considering this was written in 1953. And on the other hand, you've got the more prejudicial side of things, of like, how much are people just hating the robots because they're different and they can't relate to them. while it's not necessarily analogous to real prejudices in the real world, because these robots aren't real people and don't have feelings yet. I don't know how much they're going to evolve throughout the series. It was definitely something that made me uncomfortable at times, because obviously I was very much identifying with the people who were against the robots in this novel. And I think that's another part of what makes this novel so great. It's not something Isaac Asimov could have predicted, although I guess he kind of did. But reading this in 2026 will leave you with conflicted feelings. And that's another thing I want to mention as well. The fact that this was written in 1953 is incredible, because, you know, it's like there are so many things in this book that I take for granted, of like so many predictions that I'm like, oh yeah, okay, obviously, like, this is the way that this is because this reflects our real world. And then I go, wait a minute, they didn't have that in 1953, this is a prediction. And there are a few things which kind of highlight that it was written in the 50s, you know. Firstly, this is a very male-centric book, and a very kind of, like, male-dominated setting, the way culture kind of was in the 50s. So there's going to be some of that. And then, like, there's just little things where I'm like, there's all of this talk dedicated to, you know, how a lot of entertainment time is rationed via like your amount of time you're allowed to spend watching videos and stuff like that. I'm like, it's interesting that they don't have video games. Oh right, video games weren't invented yet. That's something Isaac Asimov did not predict, at least not in his novel. Who knows what he wrote in other novels. And one of my favorite things is how he talks about the reason that we have these mega cities on Earth now is because the population of Earth is 8 billion people, and society would collapse if it was following what they call the medieval way, which is basically society in the 50s, meant to be the reflection of current day Earth at the time. I guess 2026 would probably also count as medieval. And the interesting thing about that is, here in 2026, we have 8 billion people on Earth. Back when this novel was written, it was about 2.5 billion people. So it's interesting to see, like, the prediction of what would happen to society with such population growth, and being able to look at our actual society now and what's happening, and how some of it definitely is coming true. Not necessarily due to raw population growth, but because of the way society has failed to adapt to it. And something I really enjoy about how Asimov portrays New York life in this novel is just how normal it is. And I think all great world builders do this. They present the world to you through the eyes of protagonist, of something that is just normal, something that he's just used to, something that he doesn't see. I mean, like, he sees problems with it, but he doesn't see, like, as much of a problem with it as we do from our perspective in our real world setting. And you see how life has become this extremely, like, you're allowed to eat at this time and you have to eat this meal, and, you know, there are certain classifications of citizen, and if you get declassified, it's like a massive problem for you. It's basically the same as being made destitute. And there's just this hyper rigidity to society and complete lack of freedom that's just normal to Bailey. And the Spacers point this out as something that's, like, not great, and he's like, whatever, it's fine, we'll manage. And then another thing that's potentially easy to take for granted is Isaac Asimov's exploration of robots. Because here in 2026, robots are a very well written of phenomenon in science fiction, and they're also real, albeit not to the extent of what we see in this novel. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Isaac Asimov was, or is credited as being, the first person to really write about robots and create the idea of robots. Like, apparently there were some, like, ancient Greeks who had, like, they came up with ideas of, like, automatons, which are basically the same thing and stuff like that. But as far as we understand robots, I could be completely wrong. Let me know if I am, but I'm pretty sure Isaac Asimov is credited as, like, inventing the idea of them, which is why he did, like, the 3 laws of roboticism and stuff like that. And so a lot of the time I'm reading this novel, I'm going, this is a really interesting take on, you know, the idea of a robot and artificial intelligence, and what makes a human, what makes a person. What would it be like to talk to someone who doesn't have the capacity to feel, and stuff like this. I'm going, this is a really good one of those. I'm going, wait, no, this is the one of those, kind of. Because, to be fair, within the text, Isaac Asimov does make reference to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and calls the monster a robot. And in a sense, it is true. And I do appreciate that as well. I think that is more meant to be like the melding of old ancient history within the text of like, oh, they would see the monster as a robot. But it is also true the monster is kind of an automaton created by a man. And Mary Shelley was one of the earliest science fiction writers to ever do it and deserves the credit. And I love that novel as well, by the way. Frankenstein is wonderful. But through the use of the robot, we are able to explore these deep themes of what makes a human, and I underestimated how interested I would be in this topic, and foolishly so, because I've always really enjoyed like Data episodes in Star Trek, for example. They've been some of my favorites. But anyway, I'd like to pivot now to talking more about specific events throughout the novel as a whole. So we will now be entering the spoiler section. 15 minutes in. I think it's wild how much I've got to say about this 200-page novel compared to some of my like 1,000-page long fantasy novel videos. But yeah, if this is your jumping off point, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you'll check these books out for yourself. But I want to start talking some plot-specific details. And the first thing I want to talk about is the evolution of Bailey's character throughout the novel, and how it's not entirely organic by design. Because a curious thing happens around the midpoint of this book when Bailey goes and visits the spaces to accuse Daniil of being the murderer. First of all, he's completely wrong, and I think that's so fun. It's so fun to have a fallible protagonist who gets it wrong not just once but twice throughout this novel, because, you know, he's drawing upon conclusions which don't necessarily add up, but you can see how he would reach those conclusions. And seeing him as like this fallible detective who doesn't just get everything right all the time makes the stakes a little bit higher, I feel. But when he's in that room and he's breaking down why Daniil is not actually a robot, but, is the person that he was based on, and it's the robot that died, when he's doing that entire thing, and then it turns out that he's wrong, there's an interesting almost lapse in reality, it felt like, where the commissioner, who was kind of Skyping in, although the technology was not described that way, falls into hysterics of laughter, and out of stress and shame and embarrassment and indignity, Bailey kind of blacks out a little bit. And then he comes to when Daniil injects him with something, and we're kind of like led to believe it's just like a shot of adrenaline or something to kind of bring him back to reality, break him out of his fugue state he's entered. And then we have this spacer telling Bailey about basically their entire plan, their reason for being here, their reason for introducing robots into the general populace. The fact that people are losing their jobs to robots and being declassified and displaced is intentional, because they want to solve both Earth's problem and the space's almost opposite problem. You know, Earth has this problem with overpopulation and limited resources and unsustainable growth, whereas the spacers have this opposite problem of stagnation, and they live so long and all this stuff. And so the spacers want to displace a bunch of people on Earth to go and settle new worlds, which has not happened for a very long time, and they want to kind of subvert the medievalist movement, which one of their slogans is "go back to the soil," and they want to say, okay, do that, but go back to a different soil and get in touch with nature on another world and establish a new colony there and a new way of living there. And because you've been separated from spaces for so long, because your culture has evolved, you know, set up this new culture with robots. It'll be like a hybrid of spacer and Earth cultures. And the interesting thing is, Bailey at the start of a novel hates robots and would be greatly opposed to this idea. He's a bit of a medievalist himself. And then as he's listening to this plan, although he responds to it with some skepticism, he does kind of like think about it and go, oh, okay, that's interesting. And quite quickly, you see he begins to grow friendly with Daniil, despite the fact that Daniil's not a real person. And I found myself thinking about that curious midpoint of, you know, the commissioner's outburst and Bailey's kind of lack of consciousness and the drug he was given. I did find myself questioning it. And this is one of many instances throughout the novel that I alluded to earlier of like, you figure it out before the protagonist, which makes you feel smart, makes the logic feel whole, and just makes the entire thing feel like a cohesive story and mystery. But he was given basically a drug which would make him... It's not brainwashing per se, but it's more like drugs which would loosen his inhibitions, I suppose, and make him receptive to new ideas. And it's a really interesting concept of like, okay, but was that brainwashing? It was definitely manipulation. But I remember like listening to, I forget his name, but the spacer who's basically telling him all about their plans. I'm going, why are you doing this? Your plan hinges on people not knowing about this. And one of the things I thought is, well, maybe... I didn't think specifically he's been given a drug to make him more pliable to the idea, but I did think something is going on here. For a little while, I was like, what if... what if he's had his consciousness, implanted into a robot, and the second half of this novel is Bailey as a robot, and the big reveal is going to be him discovering that he is the very thing that he hates, and he's not real, and so on and so forth. That is not what happened. But I was very suspicious about his sudden change of heart and his pliability, and his lack of recognition of that occurring within himself. And, I'm not like a super smart Sherlock type. I didn't figure out that it was the commissioner before it was revealed. I was suspicious of him, but I was suspicious of him in the same way that I was suspicious of Daniil and at one point Jessie, because she was the obvious red herring that they gave us, but I was still a little sus. And the spaces themselves and stuff like that. And I think that's what makes this a good mystery. I think I should have been suspicious of all these different characters at these different points, because, if I had an obvious suspect and I was pointing at him the entire time, I don't think I would have been as engaged with the text as I was. But I will say, right from the very start, mysteries, and I don't read a whole lot of mystery novels, but I've watched movies, I've played games which are like mysteries, and there is a slight problem with mysteries in that in order to set up an interesting and elaborate murder case, you kind of have to give away too many specifics. And the specifics often stand out because it's the whole gun under the table thing, right? Like, why would you write about that if it wasn't going to come up later? And so when we first heard about the commissioner wearing spectacles, and then that spectacles were a weird thing to be wearing in this society, and the fact that he dropped and broke them and was around the murder scene around the time that it happened, that did have me going like, okay, that's a very innocuous detail that you've just given me. That's going to be important, isn't it? And so that did form the basis of my suspicion for the commissioner, unfortunately. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I could point to specifics of like, oh, I saw that coming, but it's not that important at the end of the day. The main thing I just want to say about the Caves of Steel is that I am so impressed. I am so impressed at this vivid and vibrant world that was presented to me throughout this novel, and how it tied in and was necessary for understanding the mystery that was taking place. Within 200 pages, it was so concise, it was so succinct, but it was also so expansive. I can picture so many more stories being told in this world. And the impression I get going forwards is that there's going to be a time jump between books and definitely between series. And that's another thing that has heightened my interest in this book as I've been reading it, is just knowing that this is, chronologically speaking, the beginning of a world which is gonna evolve and change. And I think back to the last question, or is it the final question? I forget the specific title. But that's very much a short story which makes jumps throughout time, sometimes massive jumps throughout the timeline of, humankind navigating expansion throughout the stars and resource management and stuff like that. I think this does technically take place within that universe, by the way. And so I get the sense that we'll be doing the same thing throughout the different novels. I expect that I've been told this is a trilogy, The Caves of Steel. I think it's called The Naked Sun or something is next. I don't know the name of the third book. Maybe there's a fourth. The blurb seemed to imply there was a fourth, but maybe that's the iRobot collection of stories. I don't know. But I'm really looking forward to seeing how this culture shifts, changes, and expands. And I don't even know if the second book is going to be a mystery novel. It might be a different genre as we explore the continuation of this universe. And the kind of vibe we get at the end of this book is that it's going to work, right? We're going to get spaces basically working with medievalists to go out and colonize new worlds with robots, and they called it like a sci-fi culture, like this combination of humans and robots working together. I don't know how sci-fi is spelled because I'm listening to the audio version of this, but it very much reminds me of the phrase sci-fi, science fiction, and I wonder if that's intentional. But yeah, this world just felt so alive and plausible, And the fact that I've been able to talk about it for nigh on 25 minutes and it's a 200-page book it just impresses me so much and reminds me of what can be done with just a little, you know? So anyway, that's going to wrap up my thoughts. There's so many things I could talk about regarding this book, but I think I better leave it there. I'm going to go read the sequel now, and that's it. Thanks for checking it out. Let me know down below if you've read these books before. I've been told the second book is going to be really interesting to read in 2026, so I guess we'll get back with that. I wonder if the robots are going to gain sentience at some point. I've been told there's a reason why we don't see any robots in the Foundation series. Also, I don't know what the difference between the Empire and the Foundation series is, or even which one comes first yet. I need to look into that, but that's going to be fun to discover for myself as well. But yeah, I'm fully on the Isaac Asimov train right now. Also, a couple of housekeeping things. I also will continue reading The Witcher. I basically haven't yet just because of funds and stuff, and I was trying to hold off buying myself too many luxuries, and books fall under luxury purchases. But I have now picked up the second Witcher book, and I will be reading that in Kindle format. No, I'm fully abandoning Amazon. I got that on Kobo. Death to the corporations. Anyway, bye. Leave a like if you liked the video, please.